Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first full week of Lent. Last week we had Ash Wednesday. I hope that your Lent so far has gone well, that you've chosen what to do for a sacrifice, that you've challenged yourself a little, but that it's not impossible. I pray for your almsgiving, that you've found and you've made a decision on what to do to help, giving of your time, talent, and treasure to the church, to your community, the people around you, your family, and also for prayer, that we're increasing our prayer life, that we're doing something new, maybe stretching a little bit, doing the rosary or scripture, or listening to Christian music and worship music. There's so many different ways to pray to grow this Lent. We had our stations on Friday night, which went well. So thank you all that were participated in that. And this coming Friday, we'll have stations again at St. Mary's Church at 6:30 on Friday night. Each week, I'm going to be talking about C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. When it was a couple of years ago, and I was talking to some people, and they're like people at church, and we were talking about like book group and what books could you do. And I mentioned some books, and then I said The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, and I got a couple weird looks. Like, why would you do that? Why would you want to talk about divorce? So first, this book is not about divorce. It's not about marriage. It's about the glory of heaven and how far it is, how far that's divorced, how far it's separated from hell. In scripture, we hear about the great chasm that has been set between heaven and hell so that the people cannot reach across it or move from one to the other. And so C.S. Lewis, who's also the author of like the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is in that. C.S. Lewis wrote about the great separation, and it's an amazing prose on that. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a couple chapters each week. I'm going to read parts of it, but mostly I'm just going to kind of describe things and talk about like what that has to do with us now. He wrote it many years ago. He grew up in England, lived in England, was a professor in England, Lewis, and then he wrote this book. But I do recommend, it's not a long book. I recommend reading it, The Great Divorce. There's a bus on it, which we're going to figure out why now as well. But it's so well written. I mean, he's a fantastic writer. It's so well written, but I recommend reading him. So it starts off where the main character, who we don't have a name for, we'll get into that later. It says that he finds himself standing in line at a bus station. He says he's been walking around for hours in this gray city, and everything's kind of dismal. And for hours, he walked around, and there were shops that were closed down, and there are all these empty streets. And he said no matter how far he walked, he never saw anybody, that there was nobody in this part of the city at all, just empty street after empty street. And then all of a sudden he found this line for the bus, and he said, I just kind of stood in it because I finally found people. And so he stands in line with these other people, and he gets in the end of the line. And he's kind of standing there, and he's looking around, and he's noticing that it's always raining. It's kind of that twilight where it's not dark, but it's not light, and it's just kind of gross. It's a gray city. He's saying how like it's not really nice. And he said no matter how much he walked around, he never found the nice part of the city. He's always in a rundown city. As he's standing there, he's noticing the people interacting around him. And so one person, it's a couple. I'm sorry. The first group is a couple. And one person, the woman is like, oh, I don't even want to go. And she argues with them, and she starts walking away. And the guy's like, well, why do you think I even want to go? Like, I'm only here because you're here. Like, why do you think I would want to go either? And then he walks away. So the line gets a little bit shorter, and the main character is like, oh, and I congratulate myself. I got a little closer to the front of the line. So that always kind of feels good. Every little inch we feel better when we're near the front of the line. Then there's a fight. There's a short man who just kind of starts mumbling to himself and like, oh, this is ridiculous. And why should I stand here with these people? Like, this is not the company I'm used to keeping. Basically saying like, I'm better than all of this. Why do I have to be here? And the taller man in front of him gets mad at him and is like, you think you're too good for us? And he smacks him. And the man falls down. The short man falls down. He mumbles a little bit. No one helps him. As soon as he gets up, he wanders away too. And the main character doesn't think much of it. He just kind of moves a little closer, trepidatiously, cautiously to the big man. But he's like, oh, I got a little closer. Okay, that's good. I'm feeling good. And then there's a little bit of quiet for a minute. And then there's a woman up front who starts complaining, and she's like, oh my gosh, this line is so long. We're never going to all get on the bus. This is ridiculous. And so one guy is like, hey, I'll give you $5 to take, to swap places. And so he gives her $5 and they swap places. And then she screams and everyone's looking because she got, bamboozled, that she got tricked out of the line, and she starts crying and she runs away. But everyone is still like, okay, well, I get a little closer to the front of the line, so I'm doing good. And so we can see in these people and the way they're complaining, the things that they're complaining about is that they're focused on themselves. They're focused on themselves, saying like, I'm better than you people, and I shouldn't have to wait here. And I'm only here, like, I'm trying to be nice to you, but like, it's still about him, even though he's trying to be nice. Like, I'll do what I want to do. And then the bigger man saying like, how could you say that about me, and complaining. That these people we're going to see later on are a little bit miserable. We can see they're miserable now, but we'll see even more later on. That we can, hopefully we don't, but we can probably see ourselves in them a little bit. That during Lent, the focus, as Christians always and as disciples, but our focus is to look out. And yet we can see these people, they're looking in, right? And they're saying, woe is me and poor me. And they're complaining, and then they're fighting as well. So then it says, so with that one thing and another in the queue, the line reduced itself to a manageable proportions long before the bus appeared. And then finally the bus appears. So that's all in the beginning. And this is how Lewis, or the man, describes the bus. It was a wonderful vehicle, blazing with golden light, heraldically colored. The driver himself seemed full of light, and he used only one hand to drive with. The other he waved before his face as if to fan away the greasy steam of the rain. So now we can see this bus is arriving. We don't know where it's going. The main character doesn't even know where it's going. We're still trying to figure that out, or what's going to happen. But it stands out from the rest of this gray city, where everything else is miserable and dark and rainy and ugh, and even the people are like complaining all the time. This bus stands out as beautiful. And even the guy driving it, the driver, seems to be emanating light, that he's just standing out from everything else. So the first reaction of the people is they complain about it. Like, he looks annoying. And why can't he just do his job? He looks like he's annoyed with us, like he doesn't want to stop. And the people instantly start saying like, I don't like him. I don't know what this is, but I don't like it as well. And the main character is saying like, I don't know why they were reacting that way. There was nothing about the man. He looked a nice enough guy. Looked like he just wanted to do his job. And yet the people had this opposite reaction. And maybe we've had that in our life. Maybe because we've been the one who was doing the right thing and wasn't complaining, and people complained about us. Or maybe because we've been the ones who are like, look at Mr. Do-Gooder over there. Look at Goody Two-Shoes. He or she is always trying to do the right thing, and they kind of annoy us a little bit because we want to take the lazy route. We want to take the shortcut. And they're like, no. And we're like, just stop, right? We have that sometimes. And that's how they're reacting to this man. That the main character, the protagonist, is just saying like, he looks like he's just doing his job. He seems like a nice enough guy. And yet they're complaining about him because they're calling something out. So then it says, my fellow passengers fought like hens to get on board the bus, though there was plenty of room for us all. I was the last to get in, and the bus was only half full, so I selected a seat at the back, well away from the others. But a tousled-haired youth at once came and sat down beside me, and as he did, we moved off. So again, they're like selfish, right? Even though there's plenty of room, they're pushing, I want to be first, I want to be first. I can get like that, I'm sure we all can, even though there's plenty, right? When there's plenty of food, we like to be at the front of the buffet line sometimes, even though there's food for everybody. We want to be served first. Sometimes we want to like pull out into traffic first. That's what these people are showing. These kind of represent us too. And then there's the youth, this man that comes on, sits down. He's like, hey, I'm sitting next to you because I can tell we're a little bit different than everybody else. They're all complainers. They're like, we're different. We're a little bit better than them. They're going to hate it up there. And he says up there, we don't know what that means yet, but he says they're going to hate it up there. We're going to love it. He said, because down here, it's easy, and these people aren't challenged at all. It says the appalling lack of intellectual life doesn't worry them. And so this youth starts talking about how like he's so intelligent, and he's been looking for people down in the gray city to like challenge him, and he just can't find anybody, any intelligence in the city, any intellects, anything like valuing that. And how he found like his favorite author, but that guy didn't even want to talk to him. He kept trying to read. The youth kept trying to say, well, we'll look at my stuff. And the guy wasn't interested. He kept walking away. He's like, but you're going to be interested. Here, read my stuff. This is fantastic. And he pulls out a big like manuscript. And he's like, here, you should read it. But just as he does, the main protagonist is like, oh, I don't want to read it. Like he's thinking to himself, I don't really want to read it. And he looks out and he realizes that the bus has not gone forward. The bus has gone up. And now they're several hundred feet in the air, that they're going straight up. He's like, hello, we've left the ground. Like, what is going on here? And he looks around and he sees the city. And he can see how the city is getting bigger, like more and more of the city he can see. And it's just gray and flat and dense. But as far as the eye can see, he can see and see and see people over and over. I mean, see and see houses, not people, houses. As far as the eye can see, it all looks the same, gray and rainy and gross, but he doesn't see any people. He just sees houses the whole way. As they're going up and he's watching this, the young man is talking, and he's talking about how intelligent he is and how his parents really never saw that. The 5 different schools he went to never appreciated how brilliant he was. College, the university never appreciated, never challenged him. They weren't ready for a man of his intelligence. He was very full of himself. And he said how I eventually realized that it was capitalism that was the problem. Capitalism the problem. And so he became a communist. And this is written during just after World War II. So he's referring back to the World War II, saying so he didn't want to fight. So he said, like, what is the solution? I'm going to go to America. But then America entered the war. So he said, well, we really need to go to Sweden. Sweden is where it is. They'll appreciate me there. They're going to value me there. And he still couldn't get there. And he said he blamed it on his parents, and he blamed it on his girlfriend, and he blamed it on everybody else because no one understood him or accepted him. And so he jumped under a train. He said, this world isn't for me. Now, hopefully we don't get to that point, but maybe we can see the first part in ourselves sometimes where we just feel like, I'm working hard. I deserve more. Why aren't people seeing that? Whether it's because of intelligence, like this young man, and we're priding ourselves on how smart we are, or priding ourselves on how good looking we are, or priding ourselves on how many things I have, or how hard I work, or whatever it is in our job. And we just get frustrated and saying, why are people not acknowledging that? Why don't I get recognized? And so the young man says, like, but when we go up, you and I, we're going to get recognized. We're going to get appreciated. We're going to get the recognition we deserve. It's going to be fantastic. We'll finally, be applauded for who we are. And he was about to read more like his manuscript to him. But just then there was a fight on the bus. People were pulling guns and knives and fighting because they're brawling as they have done several times. And he says nothing came of the fight, but all of a sudden he found himself in a new seat sitting next to someone new. So we're learning about the people on the bus. It's kind of introduction, these first 2 chapters. We're into chapter 2 now. We're just learning about people, and we're seeing how they're very self-centered. And the main protagonist, this man, is picking up on that and seeing how like they're very about themselves, but for different reasons. And maybe we can unfortunately see ourselves in different ways about this man, the people on the bus. So now the new person he sits next to is quite the opposite. He is a capitalist, and he says, the people down there, and he starts explaining the city and what's happening and saying like, well, how is this happening? So I'm going to read part of this. This is the man talking to the protagonist. And it says that like, as they're looking, it looks like there should be millions of people, that it's just so full, no matter how high they get, they just can't see the end of this vacant city. And so the protagonist, the main character, says like, well, why are they all? Like, where is everybody? Like, why are they not living together? And this man says, the trouble is that they're so quarrelsome. As soon as anyone arrives, he settles in some street. Before he's been there 24 hours, he quarrels with his neighbor. Before the week is over, he's quarreled so badly that he decides to move. Very likely, he finds the next empty street because all of the people there have quarreled with their neighbors and moved. If so, he settles in. If by any chance the street is full, he goes further. But even if he stays, it makes no difference. He's sure to have another quarrel pretty soon, and then he'll move on again. Finally, he'll move right out of the edge of town and just build a new house. And in this world that we're finding here, all you have to do is think of something and it appears. So if you want a new house, you think it appears. And so they just keep moving. The reason that city is empty is because it just keeps going away and people just keep moving. They don't want to live near each other because I'm bothered by, they're each bothered by people. And so the man says, well, what about the earlier arrivals? I mean, there must be people who came from Earth to your town even longer ago. And the new man says, that's right, there are. They've been moving on and getting further apart. They're so far off by now, they can never even think of coming to the bus stop at all. Astronomical distances. There's a bit of rising ground near where I live, and a chap has a telescope. You can see the lights of the inhabited houses where those old ones live, millions of miles away, millions of miles from us and from one another. Every now and then they move further still. That's one of the disappointments. I thought you'd meet interesting historical characters, but you don't. They're just too far away. And so we hear now about how even though there's so much space and there's people there, they're separating themselves. So by now we're starting to realize this is hell. This is how Lewis is describing hell as we come closer to the end of chapter 2. That it's not the hell, Lewis describes hell very differently, not in like fire and brimstone and devils and torture, but in the pain of isolation, the pain of the lack of love, that we don't have anybody with us, the pain of not necessarily physical pain of fire and brimstone and being tortured by devils, but of always like fearing something and being mad at someone and quarrel something and just saying, I have to be by myself and I have to be by myself. That a lack of love and a lack of those relationships, Lewis is pointing out, is far worse than any pain. Even on earth, we know that. Like, do we like being sick? No, being sick is not fun. When we get hurt, when we cut ourselves, if you break a bone, if you have to undergo surgery, right? Those are painful and they're not good, but we can deal with them much easier when we have love in our life, right? That we have people around us, families and friends and support. That the pain of loneliness is far worse and affects us far worse and has far more damaging effects than hurting ourselves or having to have surgery or losing a limb or being in a car accident. That the lack of love, Lewis is pointing out here, is the definition of hell. That love, where love is not. And these people just keep spreading out farther and farther. Unfortunately, that's how we can see people acting like that and living a hell on earth when they just keep dissing themselves. Do we ever do that? Kind of like push people away. That's what Lewis is challenging us to think is, how do we push people away and say, no, I can by myself. I don't want that. I don't want that. I want that. Instead of gathering people to us in loving relationships. That these people in the gray world are just quarrelsome and fighting. So we have to hope, that we're not like that as well. Okay, so as they're continue talking and they're going up, they're talking about how the town can keep spreading indefinitely because even though it's huge, there's no one in that area. That people just keep going out and going out and going out and don't want to live near each other, spreading out farther and farther and farther. And he says, this is why I'm here. What's going to bring them together is capitalism. If I can get something that's real that they want, maybe I'll make a buck and I'll bring people together because they'll want to come to the city to get the thing that's real. And the main character says, well, if they can think of anything, if they can think and a house appears, why would they need something from you? And the man says, because that's not real. Like, you want a house that keeps the rain out or a house that can protect you. And they say, well, like, why have a house then? Like, what does it give you? And the man says, well, we think of the houses because it gives us safety, or at least the feeling of safety. That even though they doesn't actually provide any safety, just being in a house, they feel better about themselves as well. Like they've done something to protect themselves. And so the character says, well, what do they have to be afraid of? And the man starts whispering and getting really quiet. And he's like, what? Like, what do we have to be afraid of? And they said, they're coming. When it gets dark, they come. And he's like, who's they? And like, do you think it's when they get dark? And then the people on the bus start yelling and say, shut up. Don't say that. Don't say that. That's just rumors. And another man turns around and says, I've been listening to you, and I can't believe these rumors keep persisting. There's no reason to think this twilight is ever going to get dark and that we have to be afraid. So Lewis is talking about here and pointing out, again, there's a lack of love. And when there's a lack of love, there's a lack of fear. I mean, there is fear, right? Because we stop trusting and we stop having hope and we start being afraid of things. Maybe it's real things. Maybe it's the things we make up in our head. And so we don't know who these they are. We don't know what's coming. We could guess we're talking about demons, but he doesn't say. That he's just pointing out how the people are afraid, right? And so they try and persuade themselves that if I can just get a little bit of safety, or if I can just not talk about it, right? If I deny it, then that fear will go away. But that fear comes when we don't have the support of people around us. that we don't have love, fear replaces that. And that's what comes about. And so during this time of Lent, as we draw closer to Christ, we can learn to let go of that fear. And that fear leaves us the closer we are to Christ. Be not afraid is, I don't know if it's the most or one of the most repeated verses and phrases in the Bible, right? That it's like the main message. Do not be afraid. Fear not. Do not be afraid. That we trust in God and we draw closer to him. We trust in the love of the community and we draw closer together, which is the exact opposite of what's happening in Lewis's description of hell. Okay, so then it says hours later. So he's been on the bus for what, hours now? And the main character says, hours later, there came a change. It began to grow light in the bus. The grayness outside the windows turned from mud color to mother of pearl, then to faintest blue, then to a bright blueness that stung the eyes. We seemed to be floating in a pure vacancy, so they couldn't see anything outside now. It was just light. It says, there were no lands, no sun, no stars in sight, only the radiant abyss. I let down the window beside me, and delicious freshness came in for a second. And then, what the hell are you doing? Shouted the intelligent man, leaning roughly across me and pulling the window sharply up. Want us all to catch our death of cold? Hit him, said the big man. So we can see how they react. He's reacting to light and saying, oh, this is wonderful, and freshness, the fresh air that is coming in. Whereas the people, the selfish people, the fearful people, the people without love are reacting to light saying, no, like that's dangerous. So we don't want to do that. Where the farther we are from love, good now seems bad, right? That our minds get messed up sometimes. And these people have been away from light for so long that now they're like, oh, that's not good. Like I want to be back to what I know as well. He says, I glanced around the bus. Though the windows were closed and soon muffled, the bus was full of light. It was cruel light. I shrank from the faces and forms by which I was surrounded. They were all fixed faces, full not of possibilities, but impossibilities. Some gaunt, some bloated, some glaring with idiotic ferocity, some drowned beyond recovery in dreams, but all, in one way or another, distorted and faded. One had a feeling they might fall to pieces at any moment if the light grew much stronger. So he's looking around the bus and seeing these people, now that the light is shining on them, are not healthy people, right? That they're not doing well, either physically or because they're so turned in on themselves that they seem to be falling apart. In the last two sentences of chapter 2. Then there's a mirror on the end wall of the bus, and I caught sight of my own, his own reflection, and the light, and still the light grew more and more. So that's going to end where we're talking about today. Hopefully I caught your attention and your interest, because in part 2, we're going to see where they arrive. I'm sorry, part 2, which is chapter 3, we're going to see where they arrive and they get off the bus and who and what they encounter there. Lewis is a fantastic writer. I would recommend reading along or reading. It's a great Lenten book to read, or anytime book to read as well. So again, we're doing The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. We're in the first full week of Lent. This Friday, we have the Stations of the Cross for the second Friday of Lent at St. Mary's at 6:30, followed by dinner. On Saturday mornings throughout Lent, we have another Lewis Lenten activity with Lisa. She's going to be doing the Chronicles of Narnia. She's going through The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is another fantastic story, and seeing how Lewis, who's a Christian, wrote Christ into those stories, and we can see Christ there. Thursday nights is going to be the Mass with Father O'Hanlon, and Sunday afternoons after the 12 o'clock Mass will be the Beatitudes, going through the Beatitudes with Father Flynn. I hope that everyone is doing well. We'll be praying for you. We look forward to seeing at Mass this weekend. Thanks so much. God bless.